The strongest form of control often starts with quiet observation. It starts subtly, a joke at your expense, a shift in the room's energy, a look that lingers too long, or a smile hiding something sharper underneath. Most people don't address it. They shrug it off, telling themselves it's not worth the drama. But then it happens again, more blatant, more biting, and in front of others. And by the time they feel the need to respond, the damage is already done. Because when you let disrespect slide, you've effectively given it your approval. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. In a world driven by power, perception, and positioning, he recognized that respect isn't something you wait to receive. It's something you actively enforce. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And when someone crosses a line with you, how you handle that moment sets the tone, not just for them, but for everyone else watching. Because in most cases, disrespect isn't personal at the start, it's a test. Fail it, and you're not just seen as soft. You're marked as someone it's safe to challenge again. So when it happens, don't delay. Don't overthink it. Act calmly, decisively, immediately. Go quiet, but not passive. Here's the first Machiavellian principle of dealing with disrespect. The person who responds emotionally loses ground. But the one who steps back with intent becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability inspires caution, even fear. Silence doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means pulling your energy away. You don't laugh to keep the peace. You don't pretend it didn't land. You don't explain how it made you feel. You simply let your absence speak, in your eyes, your voice, and your refusal to play along. It's a clean break in the momentum they thought they had, like pulling the plug mid-performance. Disrespect only survives when it gets fed, with nervous laughs, defensive reactions, or soft concessions. But when it's met with total stillness, it exposes itself for what it really is, a flimsy, desperate grasp at power. Machiavelli didn't react impulsively. He watched. He let people show their true colors, fully, boldly, before making his move. And when he did, it wasn't with apology. It was with surgical accuracy. That's your next step. Don't lash out. Don't stoop to their level. Instead, reflect their words back with sharp, calm questions. Because when someone disrespects you, they're expecting you to get emotional. They want to rattle you. What they're not ready for is exposure. So you meet their gaze and let the silence linger just long enough. You shift your posture slightly, not aggressively, just enough to signal awareness. And then, with composed precision, you ask, is that really how you meant to phrase it? Or, you sure that's something you want to stand by? Each question you ask is like a precise incision, clean, intentional, and controlled. You're not dismissing their jab. You're daring them to repeat it, in front of everyone, to expose themselves further. Most won't take the bait, because most people who disrespect others aren't brave, they're opportunists. They push just enough to see who will push back. But when you meet that move with steady silence and a gaze that doesn't blink, something shifts. They start to question themselves. And that's exactly what you want. Not retaliation, not a scene, just doubt. Because when someone makes others hesitate, second guess, or adjust their words in their presence, they don't need to ask for respect. They naturally command it. But this is where it gets more advanced. Most people can handle one bold moment. They can handle one confrontation. What they can't handle is consistency. If someone crosses a line and you respond, well, that's great. But if you relax later, if you act like it never happened, they'll circle back and test you again. So here's the third move. Redefine the dynamic right away. Don't go back to normal. Don't act like nothing shifted. You draw a new line in how you speak to them, how you carry yourself, and how unavailable you now are. Injuries should be inflicted all at once, so that, being tasted less, they offend less. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, but of more serious ones they cannot. A wise prince ought never to keep faith, when by doing so it would be against his interests. Machiavelli understood that when it's done right, public correction doesn't just stop the disrespect. It teaches everyone watching what the new standard is. So if the disrespect happened in front of others, don't just respond. Let your posture, your presence, and your distance speak louder than any comeback could. Pull back your warmth. Speak more directly. Decline their offers, invitations, and attempt to reset the vibe. You don't have to explain the shift. Let them feel it. That's the difference between someone who gets respect and someone who gets overlooked. It's not about controlling others through fear. It's about carrying yourself with clear, unshakable principles. You've now sent the message. I'm not available for that kind of interaction. And I don't owe you an explanation to make you feel better about that boundary. From that moment on, the energy in the room changes. People notice. They adjust. And when they mention your name, it comes with more thought, more caution, and far less ease. The person who doesn't get disrespected isn't usually the loudest in the room. It's the one who knows exactly how to respond the moment a line is crossed. Not with noise or ego, but with deliberate silence, sharp clarity, and a firm refusal to prioritize comfort over self-respect. That's how you shut it down before it ever gains momentum. Not by lashing out, not by taking it personally, but by doing what they least expect. Responding with discipline, creating distance, and maintaining quiet control of the room. Disrespect is rarely random. It's usually a test, a subtle nudge to see just how far they can go before you push back. And the moment you allow even one small violation, a joke disguised as a compliment, a quiet dig, a dismissive glance, you're showing everyone around you exactly how cheap your silence is. And as Machiavelli would remind you, it is much safer to be feared than loved. When, of the two, either must be dispensed with. Once you're seen as someone who can be disrespected without consequence, reclaiming that respect costs twice as much effort. That's why what you do after the first incident matters just as much as how you handled it in the moment. Because people will test you again. Not the same way. This time, it'll be quieter, more careful, more disguised. They might make a sly joke just with a smile. They might leave you out of something important and brush it off as an accident. They might drop a passive-aggressive comment just to see if it lands. And they'll be watching you closely, looking for any flicker of softness or hesitation. That's when you make your second move. You reinforce the boundary with a consequence that feels bigger than the offense. Not to be petty, but to be clear. Machiavelli's strategies weren't based on fairness. They were built on what works. And he understood something most people today try to avoid admitting. Men must be either pampered or annihilated, for they can avenge light offenses, but not grave ones. Injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that being less tasted, they offend less. A prince never lacks legitimate reasons to break his promise. If the consequence matches the offense, it's forgettable. But if it goes further, it leaves a mark. You're not acting out of emotion. You're sending a message. You don't get two chances to cross me. So when they overstep again, you don't get louder. You get colder. If they disrespected you in front of others, you respond in front of others, not with insult, but with precision. Not by getting reactive, but by being surgical. They make a comment? You pause, lock eyes with them, then turn and respond to someone else entirely. They ask you a question? You give a one-word answer, then shift your attention away. They try to rebuild the connection? You offer them the social equivalent of a closed door, polite, professional, but distant. This isn't aggression, it's removal. You're not looking to win a battle. You're showing something far more unsettling. They no longer have access to you. And that's what truly unsettles people, not being insulted, but being ignored by someone who once acknowledged them. This is where most people fall short. They want to be liked. They want to smooth things over. They want to believe that being the bigger person will earn them admiration. But Machiavelli would laugh at that idea. It is perfectly true that men must be either caressed or crushed. Respect doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from calculated consequence, delivered without rage, without explanation, and without raising your voice. And here's where your real leverage begins. People are always watching. They saw the moment someone disrespected you. They saw how you responded. And now they're waiting to see what happens next. Will you back down? Or will you follow through? This is your moment to redefine how they see you, because your image, as Machiavelli made clear, outweighs the truth. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. And what you look like after the conflict, calm or rattled, clear or uncertain, becomes either your armor or your exposure. You want your silence to send a clear message. He doesn't let things like that slide. He won't even entertain disrespect. With them, there are no second chances. Once your name starts carrying that kind of weight, everything shifts. People choose their words more carefully. They stop joking so casually in your direction. They introduce you with phrases like no nonsense, sharp, intense. That's the new presence you built. Not because you demanded it, but because you shaped it one precise reaction at a time. But there's another level, more complex and much harder to master. Because some people aren't deterred by public embarrassment. They don't care about being liked. They feed off reactions. They enjoy throwing others off balance, pushing limits just for the thrill of it. When people like that come up against someone like you, they only do one of two things. Either they back down or they double down. If they escalate, that's your cue to shift strategy. You don't meet their chaos with emotion. You meet it with structure. You escalate socially, not emotionally. If they have status, credibility, or a platform, you start framing them with precision. Use their own behavior as the spotlight. Call it out directly or subtly, but always with control. For example, you might say, "That's an interesting joke. Do you use that one at work too?" Or, "If that's how you talk to friends, I'd hate to hear how you talk to strangers." Or, "Wow, bold move saying that out loud." You're not attacking, you're exposing. You're making them sit in their own words while everyone else listens. And that's when the energy shifts. Their confidence starts to deflate, not because you overpowered them, but because you made everyone see what they were too loud to hide. Small, insecure, performative. That's what real Machiavellian retaliation looks like. It's never loud. It's never rushed. It's deliberate, surgical, executed so calmly that they don't even realize they've just been cornered. And the best part? You never lost your composure. You never raised your voice. You simply let the moment breathe, then folded the disrespect into something they now have to carry. That's how power is built in silence, not just by choosing not to react, but by turning every act of disrespect into a quiet step toward their own exposure. And when you operate this way, you stop chasing respect altogether. Because at that point, everyone already knows. You don't get pulled into debates. You don't justify your stance. You don't tolerate disrespect. You end it calmly, precisely, and for good. What most people don't realize is this. Disrespect doesn't feed on courage. It feeds on safety. Not your safety, theirs. They take shots at you when they're sure you won't fire back. They make jokes at your expense when they assume there won't be consequences. They push boundaries because they're confident you never will. That's the engine behind most acts of disrespect, the quiet belief that you're not going to do anything. But Machiavelli saw it differently. He knew real power isn't in frequent retaliation. It's in creating the possibility of response. That lingering sense that you could do something. And if you did, it would catch them completely off guard and throw their balance. It is not necessary for a prince to have all the good qualities, but it is necessary to appear to have them. This is the next level of presence. You become a threat without ever having to make a threat. You don't need to raise your voice or make a scene. You just become more difficult to read, more difficult to predict. From that moment on, when someone oversteps and you've already shown where your line is, your job isn't to win them over. It's to make them uncertain, not afraid, not intimidated, just unsure. Did I say too much? Why are they so quiet now? What are they thinking? Why didn't they respond like last time? That uncertainty becomes your shield and your leverage. Because the people who confuse others, those are the ones people start to avoid. This is exactly why Machiavelli cautioned against being too easy to read, too predictable, too open. A prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised. A leader who's too easy to read is also easy to manipulate. But when you stay quiet, unreadable, and fully in control, When you respond once, with precision and detachment, then disappear again into stillness. You stop being predictable. You become an anomaly. And in social dynamics, anomalies shift the atmosphere. People start adjusting around you, not because they fear you, but because their instincts tell them to. The mind protects itself from what it doesn't fully understand. So you let that work in your favor. You don't speak as much as others. You observe longer than is comfortable. And when you finally do speak, your words land with weight. Now here's the deeper layer. Most people think respect comes from being liked. It doesn't. It comes from being felt. It's the shift in the room when you enter. The way conversations soften, posture straightens, and voices lower. That's not charm. That's presence. And presence is built through contrast. You don't always respond. But when you do, it hits with clarity and finality. You don't seek dominance, but you make it clear you won't be crossed. You don't demand respect, but the moment it's violated, access is gone. That's how your presence becomes a silent warning. Not through drama, but through unwavering control. And then comes the rarest transformation, the one few ever master. You stop treating disrespect as something personal. You start treating it as data. This is the moment your mindset breaks away from the average. Where others hear insult and feel wounded, you hear weakness. You recognize the insecurity behind the jab, the fear beneath the sarcasm, the powerlessness masked as control. So when they mock you, you don't react. You read them. Because that's the final shift in power. When someone tries to shame you, and instead reveals themselves, it was never about you. It was always about them. So you take note. You remember. And you move forward, not with forgiveness, but with calculation. Do they still deserve access to you? Should they be cut off, quietly or in full view? Do you use them as an example or let them fade on their own? At this stage, you're not playing emotional chess anymore. You're managing position. And, as Machiavelli made clear, the strongest position is when people fear crossing your boundary, even when you're not there. It is much safer to be feared than loved. When of the two, either must be dispensed with. That's when you've won. Not when people admire you. Not when they compliment you. But when your absence holds just as much weight as your presence. Because the people who never get disrespected, they're not the loudest in the room. They're the ones who've made disrespect too costly. Not by getting angry. Not through revenge. But through steady silence, meaningful consequences, and a refusal to compromise on self-respect. You're not playing the social game anymore. You're playing the power game. And once you do that, everything shifts. People hesitate before taking shots. Their jokes sound different. Their tone softens. Their energy adjusts. Because now they understand. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be respected. And if they can't offer that, they'll be left in a silence that echoes long after you're gone. There's always a moment in every power dynamic, subtle but undeniable, when the room rearranges itself around you. It doesn't happen after you speak. It happens after you don't. After the boundary has been set. After you've made it quietly, unmistakably clear. I'm not someone you cross. It's not just that people stop disrespecting you. It's that the idea of doing so no longer enters their mind. And that's the final layer, the one Machiavelli would never overlook. You don't just deal with disrespect. You redefine who you are in their perception. Because in the end, power doesn't live in how you react. It lives in what people believe you're capable of. Even when you say absolutely nothing, you become someone whose boundaries no one can quite define. Someone whose silence doesn't mean surrender. It means preparation. Someone whose calm presence isn't an invitation, it's containment. And here's what most people miss. Setting a boundary once isn't the finish line. It's your reputation test. Not just with the person who crossed you, but with everyone else who witnessed it, directly or indirectly. Because when someone disrespects you publicly, every eye turns to see what you'll do next. They're not just watching your reaction. They're watching to see whether your value depends on their approval or stands on its own. If you can hold your ground under pressure, without blowing up, apologizing, or trying to be liked, they start to feel something they can't quite explain. Certainty. And in a world addicted to being validated, certainty is rare. Now, that doesn't mean becoming cold or closed off. It just means your warmth is no longer automatic, it's earned. You smile when it means something. You speak when it matters. And you give access only to those who've shown they respect the space you offer. That's how you become untouchable. Not through intimidation, but through energetic value. And that kind of value isn't built by adding more, it's built by subtracting. You remove the habits that dull your presence. Reactivity, neediness, over-explaining, apologizing for existing, and tolerating even the smallest hint of disrespect disguised as just a joke. That's when something shifts. The room slows when you walk in. People don't cut you off mid-sentence. They remember what you said, because you didn't say much, and what you did say had weight. You're no longer just moving through the social landscape. You are the landscape. And this is where Machiavelli's most ruthless truth applies. Men must either be caressed or annihilated, because they will avenge themselves for slight injuries, but cannot do so for serious ones. Put simply, either they recognize your value, or they lose access to it. This isn't about revenge. It's about quiet consequences, delivered without drama. The people who cross the line once, then never again, they're not a problem, they're a lesson. But the ones who keep testing you, subtly, repeatedly, manipulatively, those aren't the ones you correct. You disappear from their world. Or worse for them, you rise, while they fade into irrelevance. Because your silence exposed them, and your distance reminded them of a truth they ignored. You were never truly accessible. They were simply being tolerated. And once you embrace that shift, everything about your presence changes. You stop trying to be liked. You stop defending yourself from indirect attacks. You no longer feel obligated to be the bigger person. Because now you understand what Machiavelli saw clearly centuries ago. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. He who becomes a prince through the favor of the people should always keep on good terms with them. You don't need to protect what no one is allowed to touch. They can't disrespect you if they can't reach you. They can't undermine you if you never stood on their approval. They can't provoke you if your silence makes them question their own position. This is psychological dominance at its highest form, not through cruelty, not through ego, but through control. Control over what you choose to respond to. Control over the energy you give back. And control over who even gets the chance to see your reaction. That's how power was handled in Machiavelli's world. And that's how you carry it in yours. Not through loudness or force, but through precision, discipline, and a presence so intentional that crossing you even once becomes unforgettable. Because from that moment on, it's not just respect you command. You become the metric, the quiet standard everyone else gets measured against. Now comes the final move. The moment when someone who once disrespected you suddenly realizes they made a mistake. You don't punish them. You don't forgive them. You do something more powerful. When someone disrespects you and then realizes they've made a mistake, what do? That question defines legacy. Because at that point, you're not reacting to what happened anymore. You're shaping how the story will be remembered. You're not just managing the moment. You're defining how they'll see you and how they'll be seen moving forward. And here's the final Machiavellian truth. Men should be either treated generously or destroyed, because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones they cannot. Mercy, when done right, can be more unsettling than punishment. Because when you offer it without warmth, it sends a quiet, cold message. You no longer matter enough to be a threat. That's how the game ends, not with anger, but with indifference. After the boundary has been enforced. After your presence has been withdrawn. After you've held steady in silence and let the weight of that moment settle. They may come back. They might apologize. They might overcompensate. They might laugh awkwardly, try to test the temperature, act like nothing happened. And here, this is where your highest control comes in. You don't react. You don't offer reassurance. You don't smile to smooth things over. You stay the same. No bitterness. No resentment. No explanations. You just let them move through the new world you've created. One where you no longer seek their presence. Where your energy no longer shifts for theirs. Where they're not part of your equation anymore. They're just a ghost now, moving through a space that used to include them. And this isn't petty. This is power through absence. Because the most unsettling thing to someone who tried to shake your center is realizing you were never leaning on them to begin with. You were never seeking their validation, never chasing approval, never playing by their rules. That's the final blow. Because when they realized their disrespect didn't weaken you, it actually refined you. It made you sharper, more respected, more distant, and, in the end, untouchable. This is the role Machiavelli would have you play. Not the reactive prince, lashing out at every offense, but the quiet strategist who lets others expose themselves while staying composed, deliberate, and just beyond reach. The one who never needs to demand respect, because everyone already knows. You only get one chance to get it wrong with them, and afterward you'll notice something subtle shift. Your name starts surfacing in conversations, not because of conflict, but because of how little you gave them to work with. People start saying things like, "He rarely speaks, but when he does, I've never seen her lose her cool." You don't want to be on their bad side. Careful, they don't come back around. That's what you've built, not just a reputation, but a climate. One where people instinctively self-correct around you. They adjust their tone, rethink their phrasing. They glance around to see if you're listening. Not out of fear, but because your presence now carries weight. And from that point on, you don't have to demand respect. You've already proven something rarer than control. You've mastered presence on your terms. You show up when you choose to. You speak when it matters. And when you exit, whether from a conversation, a group, or a connection, they feel the space you leave behind. Because the person who doesn't get disrespected isn't the loudest. It's the one whose attention isn't guaranteed. So let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them wonder what you'll do next. Because deep down they already know. If they cross the line, you won't explain. You won't argue. You won't chase. You'll just vanish. And that silence will echo louder than any comeback ever could, for a long, long time. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. A wise prince ought to adopt such a course that his citizens will always in every sort and kind of circumstance have need of the state and of him, and then he will always find them faithful.